The first two wide receivers on the Washington Commanders receiver depth chart are set, and the third will be rookie Luke McCaffrey if he proves right what I've seen in OTAs and minicamp so far when training camp arrives later this month. That and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, David Harrison, credential member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for CommanderGameDay.com. And I'm here with you every Monday through Friday. Thank you for coming through today, every day, or thank you for coming through every single day. This is your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders. And if you haven't already, you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you're listening to today's show. On today's episode, our weekly recap at the end of the week here, a bit of legal news that could cost the Washington Commanders up to $450 million, plus our deep dive into the receiver group, post OTAs and minicamp. What does it take to really evaluate a wide receiver? But first, why Luke McCaffrey projects, in my book, to be wide receiver number 3 this season, but Dyami Brown is number 3 entering training camp. If you want to discuss this episode, anything we're talking about here or anything else Washington Commanders related, all you got to do is reach out, send me a text message, and you can do that by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Once you do that, you'll text me, I'll text you, give you inside information, bonus content, live texting from games, practices, press conferences, and even more. No downloads, no hashtags, no filters, no apps, no nothing. All you need is your handy dandy cell phone that we pretty much all have attached to us just about 24/7. Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson are obviously number 1 and number 2 in the Washington Commanders wide receiver room. The question really is who's going to be number 3 and then who's going to fill out the rest of the depth chart. For me, the answer on number 3 is going to be Luke McCaffrey. Though, if you're only using what we know, what we've seen today, simply due to a limited body of work by Luke McCaffrey, I think you'd have to pencil Dyami Brown into that number 3 position. I think those two guys are going to be really battling it out to determine who the number 3 receiver is. Again, my projection is that it will be Luke McCaffrey by the end of the season. And I'm gauging that based off of what I've seen at his rookie minicamp, during OTAs, during the mandatory minicamp. Not by far and away blowing out Dyami Brown or anything else. I just think that where they're both good, they're fairly even. Luke McCaffrey, a little bit more diverse in what he can do. And I think that's really where you kind of get into breaking down who's going to get used more, how do they get used, and really how you look at this receiver room. And kind of the way that we broke down the tight end room, talking about the different types of tight ends in today's game. You also have 3 predominantly used types of receivers, X, Z, and slot receivers. Those are the 3 types that are, again, most commonly used. People have their own languages all the time, so I'm not going to close the door on other people having different ways of describing these receivers, but that's what we're going to use here. X, Z, and slot receivers. X receivers split wide off the line of scrimmage right away from the formation, usually on the line of scrimmage, so lined up on the line of scrimmage. You go back to Terry McLaurin and the infamous play where he's communicating with the official. He's supposed to be on the line of scrimmage, so he's checking in with the official that he is. Receiver says, no, you're not. Terry moves up, asks if he's good. Official doesn't say anything, ends up getting a flag for not being on the line of scrimmage. Anyway, that's the next receiver, lined up wide on the line of scrimmage. Typically, you want to see good strength. You want to see good quickness from those types of receivers. And for me, when you rank the top 5 potential X receivers as what we've seen for right now on the Washington Commanders roster, I think number 1, you have to go with Terry McLaurin, clearing away the best X receiver this team has. Jahan Dotson, I would put number 2. We'll talk a little bit more about where his shortcomings lie in that type of position. Number 3 right now, I am going to give that tip to Dyami Brown, a little bit stronger, a little bit more displayed strength, I think, in his release than a guy who like Luke McCaffrey, who's right now my 4th. And then Dax Milne kind of have rounding out that 5th, although you just don't really like, outside of those 4, you don't really look at the group and say you're an X receiver. There's guys like Marcus Rosen, Jack Saint, who maybe have that potential strength in them and all those things, but largely unproven. Looking at Z receivers, again, you're split wide, so you're away from the formation, detached from the formation, off the line of scrimmage. Usually you're offset there. You're looking at guys who can really hit their vertical releases. They've got more quickness, not as much strength. And again, I still think Terry McLaurin is even your best Z receiver, right? If you have him lined up, backed off the line of scrimmage a step, I still think he's your best guy. Jahan Dotson would be your second best guy. I put Luke McCaffrey here above Dyami Brown at number 3 because I just think he's got a little bit more agility. Again, not the quickest, gazelle type of receiver that you're going to see on the field, but I think when you compare him and Dyami Brown, Dyami's just a little bit more slow in his release. And I think Luke McCaffrey is, and then Dax Milne again kind of fills in that number 5. And then we move to the slot, which is where we're going to have some different names kind of pop off here off the line of scrimmage, lined up between the tight end / offensive tackle, whoever's capping the offensive line, and the split out wide receivers, the X's and Z's. Excellent quickness, elusive ability right off the line of scrimmage. But there's kind of this evolution of the game where it used to be all slot receivers, just small dudes, right? Wes Welkers, Adam Humphries, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. There's another one. I can't believe I'm forgetting his name. It doesn't matter. You guys get the idea. But not all slot receivers now are small. You have a lot of big slots. In fact, when Luke McCaffrey was coming out of Rice, a lot of talent evaluators said he's going to be a big slot in the National Football League. Now, certainly we've seen the Washington Commanders work him in the slot, but we've also seen him work outside, which at Rice he worked outside in the slot as well. But I think the best slot, in a vacuum slot receiver this team has would be Jahan Dotson. He would be identified as a small slot receiver, though he's not like the smallest dude in the world. I think he would still be classified as a small slot receiver, maybe a tweener. I've got another one of those coming up, but he's got really good short field or short area burst, real good short area agility and explosiveness. So coming off the line of scrimmage as a slot receiver, especially against some of the smaller slot defenders out there in the league today, I think Jahan Dotson would probably be the top option there. Number 2, Luke McCaffrey, again, classified as a big slot. I'm not taking away from Terry McLaurin. I've got him 3rd. Some of that, honestly, just I don't want to see him in the slot as much. I like him out wide, and that might be why I'm knocking him down the peg. Jamison Crowder, a small slot. I've got him ranked 4th, and then Dax Milne's kind of that tweener, right? He's a little bit of a smaller dude frame-wise, but he's got more length and height, so he's a little bit bigger in that atmosphere. So kind of a tweener type of slot receiver there. But so between the groups, you have a total of 6 different receivers named there, right? Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Luke McCaffrey, Dax Milne, Dyami Brown, and Jamison Crowder, and that's kind of where you largely develop your depth chart in, because you want guys that can operate through those areas. The guys that can do all 3, great. The guys who are limited and can only do one of them, you want them to be kind of really good. And you look at a guy like Jamison Crowder, who really is only going to work out of the slot, but he's a lot better at that being in the slot, especially a small slot. Like, he's our 2nd ranked small slot on this roster. So if you want a guy like that, then he certainly brings that kind of a value, plus the return game and the special teams and all that stuff is where you come from. Now, Olamide Zaccheaus, historically, he's worked out of the slot before. He's actually worked on the perimeter as well. Not much present day knowledge. If you're sticking to just what we know from his time with the Washington Commanders, then it's kind of really hard to evaluate where they're going to use him, where his role is going to fit in. But we do know that they like him a lot. They obviously brought him in for a reason, so you don't want to count him out of that battle. And then Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint, he's an undrafted free agent out of Georgia. He's a guy that could be a sleeper, a guy that could be challenging for a back end spot on the roster as well. But there are individual skills these receivers need. So we're kind of clamshelling or nutshelling them, right? Putting them, kind of pigeonholing them in these positions, these X, Z, and slot receiver positions. But what are the individual needs or the individual skill sets that you really need to watch when you're evaluating receivers? Guys that are stronger in other areas than maybe some of their counterparts. For example, Jahan Dotson's release may not be as clean as someone like Luke McCaffrey's in certain situations, and that could have a big impact on success in the National Football League. So we'll look at those types of traits coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Passion, drive, and patience, what brings home the winning trophy in the National Football League, is also what keeps your ride or die vehicle alive. eBay Motors knows that. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by eBay Motors, who has everything you need to maintain your vehicle, but also level it up to peak performance. Whether you're looking for superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're looking for speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die vehicle, you're always going to find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's guaranteed fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're going to burn rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit. Only available to U.S. customers. Thanks again for being a Locked On Commanders, your first listen, your first view today and every day, everydayers. Thanks for coming through. Make sure you come back next week. We're going to do these same types of evaluations, same types of Commanders roster deep dives, but we're going to flip to the defensive side of the ball starting next week. So make sure you're coming back for that. In the meantime, if you need more sports coverage, make sure you check out Locked On Sports Today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every single day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. You get all the can't miss analysis, opinions, and the news without all of the drama. It's all streaming 24/7 on YouTube or for free on the Amazon Fire TV channels. App, of course, also free on YouTube. All part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So when you're watching receivers, right, the very basis of receivers. Now, obviously, you got to be able to catch. That's like number one. If you can't catch, you can't be a receiver in the National Football League. But the biggest thing that we all watch is from what? Is from the snap of the ball to the catch. So what is that really kind of comprised of? You're talking about route running. You're talking about the three portions or the three phases, three components to route running. Those are identified as your release, your stem, and your break. And of course, if you want to add in a fourth part, it's the catch, which some people will argue that the catch is the most important part, but the catch is really the result of all that other work. And a lot of people will actually tell you that the most important part of route running is the release, that you win and lose the route at the line of scrimmage with your release. Now, Terry McLaurin here, this is where when you watch a Terry McLaurin route tree or you watch his game tape, things like that. And this is an episode where I really wish that the NFL licensing rules weren't what they were, and I could pull up tape with you and we can sit here on the program, especially if you're watching on YouTube and break down the tape, but we can't. NFL licensing rules are what they are. I know some other channels don't pay attention to those rules. That's fine. We happen to be owned by a very legitimate media company. Therefore, we follow the rules. And so we can't show you tape here on the program. But when you watch Terry McLaurin's tape, or you watch his NFL Plus, or you watch his replays, or you watch whatever it is you're watching, his football IQ really stands out because there's no wasted movement when Terry McLaurin runs a route. Even when he loses his route, like Terry McLaurin is not perfect here. He doesn't win every single release, every single route, but you can really see the football IQ kind of working. And that's kind of where this whole thing starts. Getting the ability or finding the ability to get off the line of scrimmage is incredibly important. Being a receiver, the analogy I like to use a lot is being a receiver is kind of like driving, only it's like bumper cars more than it is like everyday driving, because these other drivers, the defenders, right? They're allowed to impede your path. They've got a 1 yard window to impede your path physically, right? They're allowed to collide with you. They're allowed to push you. They're allowed to shove you. They're allowed to hit you. They can't grab you, but they can do pretty much everything but grab you, and they can physically block you. After that, however, and within reason, of course, you have the right of way, right? If you correlate running a route to driving, you have the right of way. So it's important to use that, and you use that with your physicality. You use that by staying tight to your route, and you use that with your hands, and you use it by planning ahead, right? Just like you're taking a road trip, you want to plan that road trip out ahead of time to make sure that when the what ifs happen, all that stuff, you're prepared. So your stronger receivers, like a Terry McLaurin, right? He's not an AJ Brown, he's not a DK Metcalf, but he's a stronger type of receiver, especially on this roster. They can play on the line of scrimmage, where your smaller receivers like Jahan Dotson, sometimes they need to play away from the line. That's where you get those other receiver classifications. Give him a step off the line of scrimmage, so he's got a little bit of breathing room between him and even the most press defenders that they're going to face, so they can use their body positioning to manipulate defenders better. While Terry McLaurin can use some of that physicality to defeat defenders at the line of scrimmage. Either way, you want to be aggressive off the line of scrimmage, whether you're going to try to physically impose your will on that defensive back, or you're going to try to manipulate him with your body positioning, with your first steps, with your second steps, all these things. You want to be aggressive. Go out there and attack the defender. And it all starts, again, with that release. So no matter where you are on the line of scrimmage, no matter whether you're a slot or the X or the Z, whatever it is, you want to see receivers go after their defender. Now, they have to react to the defender as well, but you don't want to just stand there in one place or hop around on one foot waiting for the defender to kind of do something. The defender is doing something simply by lining up, and where the defender lines up, that's where your football IQ comes in. You decide how you're going to affect your release there. And there's a lot of things that receivers can do from their first step. Hand usage, again, you can't just like grab a dude and shove him, right? That's going to be a penalty, but you can knock hands away. You can hit shoulders. You can do all these kind of little nuanced types of things. You don't want to be flailing around crazy, or else you're just going to draw attention and you're likely going to draw a flag. But once you get off the line of scrimmage, once you get into your release, you get into your stem, that gets you back on your route, right? At the end of the day, you want to get back on your route tree or on your route path. You want to steer the defender, lean them away from your route as much as you can. Those are some terminology pieces that people will use. Whether you're going in or out, you need to set up for your break, which is coming in the next phase of this. And it's not always as simple as some people will think, well, you have an in-breaking route, so you want an in-breaking stem. You want to stem inside, so you want to release inside. So release inside, stem inside, break inside. That's not always the best way to do things. You'll see some of the best receivers, they'll actually say release outside, keep the stem outside, get the defender chasing them, and then break inside, or stem out, or you release outside. You take your stem, you actually try to stack the defender where you're getting back on your track, so that the defender is running directly behind you, right? If you think about the lanes of traffic again, It's like the vehicle traveling in your lane behind you. That's where you want the defender. And then you manipulate them so that when you break, you're getting a good amount of separation. There's a lot of different ways to do it. There's not just one way to do it, but you, and in the end of the entire process as a receiver, what you want to be doing is steering the defender and again, leading them away from where your route is going to be in some way, shape, or form. And it's not always the prettiest. It's not always the easiest to do. Again, that other defender, they've got football IQ. They study your tendencies, all those things. But at the end of the day, if you stack the defender, if you get back to your line on your route, you're typically going to be fairly successful. When you're releasing against zone coverage or off coverage, this is where you really kind of see who the most aggressive receivers are, because some receivers will just kind of jog out there, make a little bit of a lazy break out of their stem, and then you're surprised when the defender is all over the pass and right there to make a play. But what you want is, right, a lot of terms that the coaches use, step on their toes. So eat up that space, or if you got a guy in off coverage or in zone coverage, he's playing deep, eat up as much of that space as you possibly can. Attack them, step on their toes, right? Like run at them like you're going to step on their toes, then make your break, and it gives them as little time as possible to really react to what it is you're going to see. So again, at the end of the day, no matter where the defender is, you want to be attacking them as a receiver, and the best ones will do that. Terry McLaurin will do that. Jahan Dotson, again, not always the cleanest release, especially against press coverage if he is on the line of scrimmage, but you usually see him be pretty consistent with how he attacks coverage when he's eating up cushion, doing all those kinds of things, which is all part of getting this. You hear Jahan Dotson in the last couple of seasons talk about trying to be incredibly creative in the way that he runs his routes, and that's kind of what he's talking about, is not always looking the same for the defender. And it's funny because not always looking the same means sometimes you got to look the same, because you'll kind of notice defenders sometimes if you run this specific route out of this specific look, you run it one way. Next time you come out there, they're already anticipating you running it a different way. So they kind of beat you to the punch there. So maybe it's best if next time you actually run it the same way. So it's all a chess match, man. It's a lot of fun just to kind of watch it unfold. Now, Terry is obviously the best at all three phases of this and running his routes. I think Jahan is pretty solid again, but sometimes he does get bogged down in his releases, which I think where he needs to work a little bit more. Some of that's going to be limited by just physical size, right? You get a bigger DB out there against a relatively smaller wide receiver. It just kind of is what it is at some points. Dyami doesn't display a lot of line of scrimmage agility, which is why I kind of have Luke McCaffrey stacked ahead of him when it comes to overall route running. But he does, when he does win his at the line of scrimmage in his release, we've seen plays where Dyami Brown really kind of flashes his downfield ability. Dax is the same, doesn't have a whole lot of mixture in his bag of tricks at the line of scrimmage. And again, Luke McCaffrey, largely widely unknown, which is why my number 3 position for him is mostly projection, because it's again, some of his college tape, some of it's just what we see in OTAs and minicamp. But I do like so far the diversity in what we've seen from him, being able to get off the line of scrimmage and get downfield as well. So those are things we're looking for in these receivers as we get into training camp. We want to see that catch and traffic ability. We want to see the tracking the ball ability, the willingness to focus on the catch, not worry about the contact. That's a big part. But also it all starts again with that route. It starts with that release, the stem, the breaks. When you're watching these receivers, don't just watch the catch. Don't just watch the one-handed catch. Don't just watch the diving catch. Watch it from start to finish, because that's where you're going to find who the most all-around receivers are on your team, or when you're watching college players doing whatever it is. Up next, the impact of a lawsuit involving the Washington Commanders, but they're not alone in this lawsuit. This time, the entire league is involved, and our week in review here on Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Commanders and this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. If you're like a lot of other people, you might be comparing your life to the life of others around you, even if only from time to time. Social media can certainly play a big part of that. You see this person over here who's doing nothing but vacationing, all smiles, everything is just hunky-dory, and sometimes your life isn't. Sometimes you wish that your life looked like someone else's, and that can prevent you from seeing the positives in your own life. Comparison is simply a thief of joy, and it's easy to become envious or fall in love with other people's lives. Well, therapy can help you focus on what you want, and it can focus on what you have instead of what others want and what others have. And from there, you can focus on living your best life. It's helpful to learn positive coping skills, how to set boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. And it isn't just for those who have experienced major traumas. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can change therapists anytime for no additional cost. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders. Thanks again, everydayers, for coming through every day. There is a jury in a lawsuit that has awarded customers of the NFL Sunday Ticket under DirecTV a total of $4.7 billion in damage, just residential customers. Business customers have been awarded nearly $100 million in damages. And what this basically means is that if this decision gets held up and gets ratified or whatever it's called, the NFL will have to pay out that amount of money to customers of NFL Sunday Ticket, ranging from the years 2011 to the years 2022, when it was under DirecTV, for violating antitrust laws. And essentially, the root of this lawsuit is that the NFL, by isolating this one package, where it's only one package where you can get every single game every single year, and isolating to only one provider, a satellite TV provider, DirecTV, and by jacking up the prices, essentially had predatory business practices that took advantage of fans unduly, unfairly, and unnecessarily. And the jury that heard this class action lawsuit, so this class action lawsuit represents every NFL fan, every fan that had NFL Sunday Ticket. You did not have to sign up for this. You did not have to sign a petition. You did not have to show up to court. You are being represented. If you were a customer of NFL Sunday Ticket on DirecTV from 2011 to 2022, you are part of this group. Now, you can opt out of it, and that's fine if that's your prerogative. But if you don't opt out of it and it does get held up, you will be entitled to a portion of those damages. Again, for residential customers, so if you had it at your house or your apartment or your condo or whatever it is, your private residence, $4.7 billion in damages. If you had it in your business, your bar, your restaurant, whatever that is, nearly $100 million in damages. ESPN also reported, quote, since damages can be tripled under federal antitrust laws, the NFL could end up being liable for $14.39 billion. The lawsuit covered 2.4 million residential subscribers and 48,000 businesses in the United States who paid for the package of out-of-market games from the 2011 through 2022 seasons on DirecTV, end quote. The suit could cost each of the 32 NFL owners, including Washington Commanders' Josh Harris, who wasn't even an owner during this portion, $450 million in damages. Welcome to the NFL, Josh. Hopefully, things go the right way. I'll just leave it at that. Last Friday, Locked On NFL, my co-host there, Tony Wiggins, and I, we talked about this. So if you want to hear my full thoughts on the lawsuit itself, head over to last Friday's Locked On NFL episode. We'll talk about that over there. Week in review here on Locked On Commanders. We started off the week Monday with a deep dive into the quarterback position group, including evidence of why Jaden Daniels is already living up to his number one quarterback hype here in the DMV. On Tuesday, we talked about Brian Robinson Jr., the running back, being the top dog in that room, although veteran Austin Eckler is a close number two, maybe even a 1A to Brian Robinson's 1 or a 1B to Brian Robinson's 1A. And the battle for RB3, the third running back spot in Washington, is between Chris Rodriguez Jr. and Jeremy McNichols, who, by the way, used to play youth football for Snoop Dogg, if you're a fan of that. Wednesday, we went in on Tiki Barber, former New York Giants running back, who decided to speak out of turn about Austin Eckler's professional decision-making. And we broke down the tight end room just like we did here today, talked about the group and talked about how to evaluate the position moving forward. Thursday, we discussed at length the battle between Brandon Coleman and Cornelius Lucas for the starting left tackle position and the potential of Coleman moving to right tackle, a position he also played in college, for those who would be incredibly upset with me if I didn't mention that, in 2025. And today, of course, we wrapped up the week, wrapped up our offensive deep dive position groups with the wide receiver position, talking about the wide receiver depth chart potential, also talking about how we're watching these receivers, where they kind of stack and rack, and some of the characteristics you want to see in these receivers groups. And then, of course, we talked about the Washington Commanders being lumped in with the rest of the NFL in this antitrust lawsuit being conducted on behalf of NFL Sunday Ticket consumers. So that wraps up the week here at Locked On Commanders. Coming up next week, we're going to do this exact same thing, but we're going to do it on the defensive side of the ball. In the meantime, if you got questions or comments, throw them into the YouTube comment section or text me by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. As always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listener, your first view today and every day. Thanks for coming through on a regular basis like you do. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind. We'll see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.